All right, welcome back to Jay Creates. Today we're going to take our first swing into regular size cutting boards or larger size cutting board. If you remember a little while back, I made a bar board, a mini cutting board. I'll put a link up here or in the description below for you to check that video out. But don't do it until you watch this video altogether. Anyway, so this is going to be like my first dive into a regular size cutting board. Just out of the blue, my brother texted me. He's like, I'm tired of these plastic cutting boards I have. I need something nice and made of wood. And I said, well, I can make that happen. So we came up with a plan. He didn't want any dark wood. He likes the lighter colored wood. So we're going to go with maple. And then we're going to use this cherry, which is light, but it's also dark at the same time. So it's darker than the maple is going to be. So it'll give it a nice contrast. So this is 36 inches. So the board is going to be just under 18 inches because we're going to lose about 1/8 of an inch when we cut this board in half. So it'll be just under 18 inches. I'm going to call it a 12 by 18. And this, I can get the 18 inches out of here. So we're going to cut 4.5 inches of the maple. Well, we're going to rip it to 4.5 inches. And then we're going to rip another piece to 2.5 inches. And then well, that's the cherry, right? 4.5 inch of cherry and a 2.5 inch of cherry. And then we're going to do a 3-inch, which this is already 3-inch maple. And we're going to do a 2-inch maple. So we're going to go over to the miter saw now. We're going to cut this in half. We're going to square off this end and get rid of the yucky part here. Then we're going to table saw out and we're going to rip some strips out of it, and then we'll get to a glue up. Might not get to the glue up today because I just used the good clamps on something else. But we can at least get started on this. We'll get everything cut. We'll place them out how we want it, and we'll send my brother a picture and hopefully he likes it. So I marked it out at 18 inches. I'm going to cut it right on the line. So both pieces will be just a smidge under the 18. Next, we'll get the table saw out and we'll rip some strips. Ripping strips. I think that's a little bit bigger than 4.5. Yeah, it's like a smidge over 4.5. It's all right. We're going to run it through the planer, right? Or the planer, the jointer. We're going to run this edge through the jointer. And we have a nice, straight, smooth edge for the glue up. And see, I kept this cool looking grain here. That was my goal for that. This piece, so what did I wanted a 2.5. Yeah, I wanted a 2.5 inch. I got a 2.25 left. So we'll make do with that. And it's 18, just over 18 inches. So we got these two pieces. And we'll just make up for it on the maple. Yeah, so I wanted a 2-inch maple. So I'll rip this at just a smidge over 2 inches. Alright, we'll try that. Can't see it on here. 2.25. Two and a quarter. So again, it's a little bit over 2.25. We're gonna joint the edges so we get good glue up. So we cut the the things to length, and then we ripped them through the table saw. So here's how it's going to go. We're going to have the cherry with the cool looking grain. This is going to be a face grain board. All right, I'm new into this. I think face grain would be a good starting point, and then we'll move to learning how to do edge grain, and then maybe hopefully someday end grain. But anyway, for my first official large cutting board, I'm going to go face grain. So we got this cherry here with the awesome grain on it. Then we got a 3-inch, this is 4.5. Then we have a 3-inch piece of maple, followed by a 2.25-inch cherry, and another 2.25-inch maple. So it's going to look like this when it gets all glued up and put together. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run all the edges through the jointer so that we get a good seam and a good glue up. That's what we do. One more time. I think that's going to work. Let's get out the big clamps. We're going to get this thing glued up. Alright, so let's get these ready for glue up here. That one, that one, that one, that one. Let's try to put these at the same level. Alright, well, here we go. The first of hopefully many large cutting boards for me. I did not put enough glue on there. I can see it, I can feel it. I think I am going to put one or some glue on this edge as well, just so I have a little bit of extra glue in there. I think that curly maple is going to soak up a little bit of glue, so let's go ahead and put some on the cherry as well. Give it a double dose. So these boards are just over 18 inches long. So I will trim the corners to get them, you know, straight, square, and get this closer to the 18. Probably be a little bit under 18. But we can deal with that. All right, so I am trying to get them as close to flush as possible so that when I do trim the edges, we don't lose that much. All right, so I got those a little bit snug. I need other clamps. Where'd they all go? All right, so when they're doing the glue ups, it's a good idea to put some cawls on there. So the cawls are just gonna put pressure from below, top and bottom, squeezing the boards together, making sure that they're flat. And the blue tape is going to help prevent the wood from adhering to the other wood. I think, I mean, all I have is blue tape right now, but clear packing tape is the best, in my opinion, to use on the cawls. And there you have it. It's all clamped up. So we have 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clamps on this thing. So hopefully that's enough to get the glue squeezed in and for it to bond really good. The maple is a smidge higher than the cherry, so we are going to plane it down so that it's all equal, but that doesn't come until after the glue is dry. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it in on the warm porch, and I think we'll just let it sit and come back tomorrow. Alright, here we are. It's the next day. I don't want to say it's been 24 hours, but it's been, you know, pretty close to 20 hours anyway that we've had this thing in the clamps. So it's time to take it out of the clamps and see what we have to work with. Alright, so it looks pretty good so far. So you have your cherry, maple, cherry, maple. So I'm going to get the planer out. Being that the cherry was a smidge under 3/4 of an inch. The maple was exactly 3/4 of an inch. So we got a little bit of a lift on the maple. So I'm going to run this through the planer. It's going to level those out and get the rest of the glue off. And we're going to bring it down to just under 3/4 of an inch. So now it's all nice and level. Still a little bit of sticker residue. So I am going to sand it. So the sanding should take care of that. Alright, so I got this all sanded down to 320 grit. I started at like 120, worked my way up. I did record this part already, but there was no sound because I didn't have my microphones on. So we're kind of doing it again. Anyway, so I did take a little bit off each corner. And I'm just going to do, again, I'm just going to square it up one more time. Just to make sure it's all even, because it is a little bit off. And I don't know if it's the blade or the table saw or both. I'm going to try it on the crosscut sled. For the first piece, I just used the miter gauge, which may or may not be totally square. So I'm just going to get this lined up, and I'm just going to shave the sides off. Alright, so now we finally got this squared up. I don't know if it's the table saw, the miter gauge, or my crosscut sled that I have. Something wasn't perfectly square. I did notice the crosscut sled had a little bump on one of the pieces of 2x4. I didn't notice that when I put it together, and I really haven't used it more than, you know, once or twice since I put it together. So anyway, instead of 18 inches to get it totally square, it's down to 17 3/8 of an inch. So still pretty good. My next task is I got this set to do a 45-degree chamfer on the top and the bottom here on each side, and then we're going to set it up and do a chamfer on the top and bottom as well. So this is actually going to be the top with the nice thicker piece of cherry. But let's get this chamfers cut. We're going to go ahead, and we're not going to put a huge chamfer on this or a huge 45-degree angle. This is not a thick board, so we're just going to go with a slight 45, a slight chamfer on all four corners, top and bottom. I already got the table saw set to do the sides, so we're just going to run that through and hope for the best. I popped the breaker and everything went dark. So I think that looks wicked awesome. Got a little bit of burn marks here from the table saw, not a big deal. That's from, you know, trimming it to size. So my next step on this is I need to do what they call a water pop or raise the grain. So since I've already done it to 320, I'm going to take a wet rag and I'm just going to wipe the whole thing. You can use a spray bottle too. I just don't have one. So just a wet rag, wipe the whole thing and let it dry naturally. And that's going to it's going to rise, can't talk. It's going to raise any grain that, you know, they call it like a water pop, right? So you're going to raise the grain, all the little furry, it's going to feel like it's furry. And then you come back in with your 320 and you sand it all again. So I'm going to go get a wet rag. We're going to wipe this whole thing down. We're going to let it dry naturally. and then we'll come back and we're going to hand sand it for the finish sanding. So once the finish sanding is done, we can go ahead and get some oil on this thing so you can kind of see it. See how that cherry and the maple shine when it gets wet? So that's kind of what it's going to look like with the oil on it. So let me get this done up, and then we'll come back and put some oil on it. I'll do the finish sanding, you know, before we come back. I don't want to make this video any longer than it needs to be. Okay, so I got the final sanding done, and I forgot to record me putting the brand on the back. So here it is. It looks really good on the maple and, you know, the lighter woods. But with the coasters that I did, when I put the brand on, you know, the dark walnut wood kind of, and then you add the oil, makes it a little bit darker, kind of drowned out the logo, but you can still see it. But it looks really, really good on light colored wood. So before we go ahead and put the cutting board oil on, this is just food grade mineral oil enriched with vitamin E, Howard brand cutting board oil. So I'm going to lather this up. I'm not going to rub it on with a cloth or anything. I'm just going to put some gloves on and just massage it into the wood. But the first thing I'm going to do is hit this with the tack cloth to get any sawdust residue off. The tack cloth is, you know, it's just a sticky rag, I guess you want to call it. So it's going to get all that sandpaper or sawdust off of it, or the sanding dust. Now we're going to put the oil on. This is a new board, so it says you should do at least 2 coats for, it says for anything over 1.5 inches thick. We're not 1.5 inches thick, we're like just under 3/4 of an inch thick. So I think if we just do 1 coat, let that soak up for a few hours, come back and buff it out, it's going to look great. I'm not going to wait the whole couple of hours or overnight until I show you the final result, but you're going to get a good idea on what it's going to look like as we're putting the oil on. And then I'll put up a few photos at the end so you can see the finished product. And I can already see that it's going to look freaking awesome. So I'm going to show you. Look at that. I'm just massaging it into the wood. Don't be afraid to load it up. Shine that up a little bit. Look at that. That looks pretty cool. Alright, I'm just going to have out of here. We'll come back and we'll do a little wrap up. Tell you what I could have done wrong, could have done better, didn't do right, all that good stuff. And that's it. Just gonna let that soak in. I'm gonna put a couple of pictures up here at the end. Let's talk real quick. I know I'm using, like, well, besides the planer, the miter saw, well, let's just do it this way. The table saw, I don't know how old it is. It was square and plumb and straight, 90 degree when I first started using it. Granted, I don't check it as much as I probably should. So I think it was a little bit off in the cut. So we went from 18 to 17 3/8. And then the little 45s that I did, I got to find a better way to make those even. That fence, you know, I put that on. My stepfather and I built that and put it on in it last year, and it was square at that point. But I think it is a little off now. So that made my 45s maybe a little bit thicker on here, and then it thins out. You can't really notice it unless you're like me up on top of it. And you're not, you know, I've already showed it to my brother. Like I said, he asked me to make him a board. He didn't notice it, so I'm not going to bring it up. there was one little defect in the wood that I didn't notice till it was all glued up. And this piece of maple was missing like a millimeter or a millimeter and a half chunk of wood there. So when I glued it up, it left a little bit of a gap there. So I kind of put a little extra glue in there, a little bit of sawdust, and we'll just keep that on the bottom. And I told my brother that, you know, as you use it, just make sure you dry it off right away and put this side down and just, you know, clean the top of it. I gotta say, I think it turned out really good for my first large size cutting board. And again, this is a face grain. Maybe on the next one, or maybe in a couple more, I'll try an edge grain, and then eventually move on to a end grain. I guess end grain is supposed to be the best, but is also a little bit more prone to, well, they all have pros and cons. Like face grain, edge grain is going to dull your knife faster. End grain won't dull your knife as faster, but you have better chance of failure, I guess. I don't really know. I'm not a cutting board expert, but I think I did pretty good for my first try. It's a tiny bit smaller than I would have. It's still 12 inches, but now it's, instead of 12 by 18, it's 12 by 17 and 3/8, which is still going to work just fine. So next time I'll make it like 19 inches, and then we'll bring it in from there. That way, if something is not square in the beginning, I have a better chance of fixing it without it shrinking more than it should. But anyway, I like it. I love it. I'm going to make some more of it. Make sure you leave a like, a comment, subscribe to the channel. Have a good new year. Catch you in 2025. It's probably when you're already watching this, but I thought I'd say it anyway.